Welcome, everyone, to the Green Party of Manitoba's monthly series. Today's topic are food choices and our health, the importance of a plant-based diet, with three guest panelists in order of presentation: Dr. Tushar Mehta, Vesanto Melina, and Charlyn Black. Before we continue, I'd just like to offer a few comments, a few territorial acknowledgements, just by blending remarks shared by Negon Sinclair, who many of you know, in his wonderful book recently published called Winnipeg.
Mhm.
And it's from the chapter entitled Seeds, page 301 to 303, with beautiful words from community leader Val Hebert. For those of you who aren't familiar with Nigan, he's an Anishinaabe professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba and an award-winning writer, commentator, and activist. In Val Hebert's words, we acknowledge this land and its soils are alive, powerful in spirit and mystery. The story of this land is lived by the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene, and Red River Métis. We join this story and seek to live in right relations with all other spiritual beings of this place. In my words, we equally acknowledge and never forget the history of colonization, violence, and struggle in this place. And in Nagan's words, territorial acknowledgements are seeds, opportunities for truth-telling, growth, and action. They require us to plant, nurture, and care for them, so we must take seriously the responsibilities they require of us. With that, I'd like to welcome all of you to our session. And really, without any further ado, we'll get started. Um, my
Oh,
colleague, my colleague Laura will be monitoring the chat window. And just because of scheduling, we'll likely take a couple of questions after our first presentation and then hold questions for the second and third presenter to the end.
oh,
And I guess I'll just mute those who might be putting their speakers to use. So, what I'll do is introduce each panelist when it's their turn to present. So, let's start by introducing Dr. Tushar Mehta. Dr. Mehta practices emergency medicine in the Greater Toronto area, and his research interests include the medical and nutritional benefits of a plant-based diet and the impacts of animal agriculture on the environment and global food security. He also does volunteer medical work in India and Haiti and has volunteered with several social justice organizations, including Project Canoe, an organization supporting at-risk youth, and the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. Tushar is the co-founder of plantbaseddata.org, from which I pulled your bio, so I hope I was still accurate, Tushar. So, Tushar, welcome. Welcome to Winnipeg. You're calling in from Toronto, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a pleasure because I'm a longtime Green Party supporter, and also I do believe that the things we're talking about today are so relevant to the Canadian Canada's health and nutrition as well as globally. All right. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about. Dennis did ask me to focus a lot on health, but I'm going to go a little bit broader than health. I'm sorry, Dennis, but I hope it's okay. And in terms of, I like to acknowledge not just a land acknowledgement, but I also go through this. I humbly acknowledge that myself and even the society and economy I'm part of, we're not just settlers, but I believe that we're part of a aggressive and continued colonization of Indigenous people, the global poor, and of Mother Nature. And both here in Turtle Island, North America, and around the world. And as we grow and spread, we're kind of decimating nature. And I think that what we're talking about here is very important for people's health, and for protecting vulnerable people around the world and protecting nature as well. Okay, so plant-based data, as mentioned, is the website and project that I co-founded. I'll provide my slides for references as well. And we'll start with this. What is a healthy plant-based diet? Now, I think that Visanto is going to cover a lot of these things, so I hope I'm not overlapping too much. But when I talk about plant-based diet, I'm not just talking about vegan diets. I'm talking about flexitarian, pescatarian, meat reduction, vegetarians, people who are mostly focusing on whole grains, legumes, fruit, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, um, and hopefully eating lower fat, not necessarily zero fat, and healthier forms of fat, plant-based fats, and and most of our protein and nutrition and our calories coming from plant-based foods. Okay, so it's not all or nothing, like vegan or nothing. The science really shows us that incremental beneficial changes have incremental benefits for health and for the environment as well. Okay, so a healthy plant-based diet is that. Of course, I personally I am vegan, and I hope that people go as plant-based as possible in a healthy way, and that also includes maybe including some junk food we can have, but including some processed food, but avoiding the bad processed food. Okay, and we talk about having B12 as well as part of our plant-based diet is that we're getting B12 from somewhere. All right. And what are the health benefits of a plant-based diet, of a healthy plant-based diet, a good plant-based diet? Okay. We get lower rates of all-cause mortality. That means we die less. We die less at any given age. We die a little bit less, and essentially people can live somewhat longer. Now, you have people like myself and modern medicine that can extend people's lives quite a bit, actually, right? Um, but you know, perhaps we could do a bit better with a healthy plant-based diet. And even if modern medicine was able to take us to the same level, um, we would still have probably a better quality of life if we had a healthy diet as well. Okay, so even though medical systems can extend your life, the quality of life matters. So, but there is good evidence that there's lower rates of all-cause mortality, lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of cancers, certain types of cancer, lower rates of diabetes, great improvements in diabetes, less obesity, hypertension. And another thing that people may not think about as much is that there's growing evidence that we get less dementia as well. So things like Alzheimer's disease and those kind of things, much of that can be prevented or delayed. Okay. Now, how is nutrition research done? We have all kinds of long-term studies as well as looking at cohorts and randomized trials. I'm not going to get into this because I originally created this slide deck for physicians, but just note that there are different types of studies that we look at. You're looking at the quality of those studies. You're looking at the different groups in those studies and who is compared to whom and how is it done. And you're looking at also who funds studies. Now, the funding question is not the be all and end all, but a lot of times the funding, if it's from industry interests, a lot of times you see that the methods that they use to do the study can be very skewed. So you can get studies that show you that, hey, it's okay to eat X, Y, or Z, and then others that show you that those X, Y, or Z things might be detrimental. But you have to look at the methodology of how that study was done and how it came to its conclusions and the quality of the study. And it's hard for the regular public to do, but that's what people like Vesanto, myself, and others, we do. We want to look at the better quality studies. Now, these are examples of studies. This 2020 study, like association between plant and animal protein intake and overall and cause-specific mortality. Or this 2016 paper, association of animal and plant protein intake with all-cause and cause-specific mortality. These are the kind of studies that we'd be looking at, usually published in reputable journals, but not necessarily, like sometimes there's smaller journals that have good studies, and there's sometimes bigger journals that also carry bad studies too. So you have to always look at the quality of the study. But these are the kinds of things that we look at. And if you go to plant-based data, you'll find that we have literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies amalgamated. These are just a couple of examples that I've pulled. We have similar studies when it comes to cardiovascular disease, showing that consuming more animal products as opposed to good plant proteins increase all-cause mortality, so just increases mortality in general, as well as increasing mortality that comes from heart disease or cancers, right? And we always like to see that if you're reducing heart disease, you should also be reducing any type of disease mortality. You want to also see that study shows a general decrease in mortality. It's not just you're having less heart disease, but having more of something else. But overall, There's less heart disease, but there's also overall less mortality as well. There's dementia prevention. These are a few studies that I have just pulled, and my slides will be available. I don't need you to read them all right now, showing that there is reduced dementia amongst people who have lower cholesterol, lower diabetes, and probably with plant-based diets too. There's good studies showing again that the omega-3s that they always talk about, when you put all the studies together and all the more contemporary studies, it's almost a wash. And in for the most part, it doesn't really show there's too much benefit from omega-3s that people obsess over quite a bit. Now, maybe we can still take them, but maybe the emphasis on eating fish all the time isn't as strong as it's made out to be. Okay, the benefit is not as strong as it made out to be, and that there is some actual evidence for plant-based omega-3s as well. Noting that there's also from fish and seafood mercury and things that people ingest. There's less type 2 diabetes, less complications of diabetes. There's less cancers and mortality from cancers. Not all cancers. There's some evidence that general overall cancer mortality is reduced, as well as reduction of specific types of cancer like breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, lymphomas, leukemias, and a few things like that. So there's a few specific cancers that are more reduced than others when it comes to plant-based diets. And I always tell people, please do look at my slides. Go to plant-based dieting. You'll find a lot of the studies there, very well organized. And there are good references here as well. I provided these references here. One's the website, and then there's this textbook regarding plant-based nutrition, as well as this paper from 2022 that overviews plant-based and vegan nutrition. But I should also add Vesanto Melina's books here. She's got a number of them, and she will show you those. And our Canada's latest food guide is very plant-based because it's the first food guide in Canadian history to not have industry involved in manipulating what the food guide is. Right? And there's also the Eat Lancet Commission, which you can see in the bottom left corner there, which is sort of a global food guide, which is very important, but showing that we can have good plant-based diets that apply to most of the world. Maybe not every place in the world has traditional foods that are easily plant-based, but most of the world does. And this Lancet project reflects on that. So what do I eat? Okay. We like to talk about the different plant-based food groups. This is the way I kind of break it down, which is fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and legumes, remembering that soy is a type of bean or legume, okay? And it's quite wonderful. Nuts and seeds, all right? And also healthy fats, right? We don't want to go crazy on eating lots and lots of fats, but there are healthy plant-based fats that some people say we have to just completely eliminate them. I don't quite think so. I think that a small or medium amount, depending on how many calories you need, they're okay. Just choose the good ones, all right? And the ones that we don't want are palm oil and coconut oil because they're saturated fats. But the other fats are generally pretty good, okay? And some plant-based meats are also good, okay? We have to look at the sodium content and if there is a lot of saturated fat in there. For example, if they use coconut oil, palm oil, or have high sodium, that's not so good. But there are some that are pretty good. I generally use the rule, try to go for less than 200 milligrams of sodium for every 10 grams of protein and avoid the palm and coconut oil in the product. And if we do that, some of these can be really, really good and really, really handy for us as well. Because a lot of people are transitioning from meat-based diets and they're not automatically going to eat all of the beans and legumes as well. And these things are also very convenient because they provide a very concentrated source of protein. And what some of our wonderful registered dietitians, like I think Vesanto and Jeannie Messina and people like that say is they eat the rainbow, have a colorful, broad, diverse diet, and that's really enjoyable and beautiful. Okay. Know your proteins, beans, lentils, soy, nuts, seeds, whole grains. Okay. And I'm a really big proponent of things like soy milk as well. I think that it's fantastic. It's fortified with B12 and calcium and they're really good. So there's, hemp and nut butters and all these things as well. So know our proteins so it becomes easy for us. And make sure we take B12 as well. That's the one thing you can't get from plant-based foods is vitamin B12 generally. So we want to take a supplement or have fortified foods. And maybe once a year, every couple of years, just have the B12 level checked, okay? You won't have to always do that. And this applies also to people who are not plant-based because when people go over the age of 50 or take certain types of medications or just happen to have low B12 absorption, there are many people who are fully eating animal-based foods, but they still have low B12. So it's good for other people to check as well. And we want to avoid the plant-based junk food. This doesn't, so there is some processed food that's actually okay. And processed food is the subject of misinformation. And we got to know which ones are good for us and which ones are junk food and to avoid the junk foods. All right. And that brings us to misinformation. There is a huge amount of misinformation that is targeted at plant-based foods from the meat and dairy industry. And they do all kinds of things, create all kinds of narratives to tell you that seed oils are bad or that veggie meats are all bad. They're all processed foods are bad, and therefore even soy milk and bread and things like that are bad. And there's all kinds of misinformation out there, and it becomes very, very tricky. When you look at studies that they quote, you see studies that do not distinguish between whole grains versus refined carbohydrates. Refined carbohydrates are not good, but whole grains are good. Okay, grains are good, but whole grains. And they don't distinguish between expert opinion and clinical studies, or they have poor comparison groups, and they go through other methodological problems that will bias the study in their own favor. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about environment. Why are plant-based foods better for the environment as compared to animal-based foods? Now, to get animal-based protein, you have to feed an animal. And the animal will metabolize calories and metabolize protein in the process of their growing and in process of their functioning. So to get 1 kilogram of chicken protein from chicken flesh, you have to feed that chicken 3 to 6 kilograms of plant protein to get there. So you're feeding this much protein to the animal, in this case chicken, and getting only this much back. But it's even a larger amount for pigs to get even a smaller amount back. And also an even larger amount for cows, which are the least efficient converters of protein and calories. It takes 10 to 18 kilograms of protein to feed that animal to get 1 kilogram back in terms of flesh, okay, the protein in the flesh. And it can be even worse in developing countries where the feed conversion ratios are even worse. It depends on how the type of cattle, the breed, as well as conditions and how much they have to walk, how much they have to burn calories. The more isolated they are in factory farms, the more efficient they actually are. And therefore, it takes a lot more land and water to feed an animal to get a kilogram of protein, as compared to directly consuming a kilogram of protein from plant foods that are protein-oriented plant foods like beans, nuts, legumes, soy, and even whole grains. Okay. Now, farmed fish, eggs, dairy, even insects, they still have a feed conversion ratio. So people will tell you that, oh, these are really, really efficient, but not compared to plant proteins. Okay. It's about 3 to 4 kilograms in for 1 kilogram out in terms of protein. So that means you're wasting 2/3 to 75% of the protein fed to the animal instead of eating plant proteins directly. Okay. And when you have organic animals or grazing animals, that makes everything even worse in terms of feed conversion ratio. So now, in terms of global ecology, we have cut down half of global forests. We have cultivated about 40 to 50% of the non-frozen surface of the earth. We're using about 75% of the land-based environment. We're using 3/4 of all freshwater systems for our own agriculture. We've altered 2/3 of the ocean or even more. Okay. And we are 8 billion people now, and we'll be 10 billion people by 2050. Our population is growing very fast globally. We add 1 billion people to the world every 10 to 12 years. That's a growth rate of just 1%. All right. And if you look at all the animals on the world, all the mammals in the world, okay, if you look at all the mammals, there are more than, I think, 5,000 species of mammals. All right. And oopsies, I just reduced my screen size here. Okay. Can you still see? Oh, yeah, you can, right? Okay. So there's over 5,000 species of mammals. And if you put them all on one scale, and you just take humans and our few species of livestock that we raise, the mammals that we raise, the mass of all the wild mammals would be less than 4% of that total biomass. We have completely taken over life on Earth. Okay, this is completely skewed. Now, if we, whoops, what's going on here in terms of, is my presenter view okay? Huh. Um, what's going on? I messed up something here. I'm on wrong. There we go. Okay, there we are. All right. So 10,000 years ago, we had 7 times more biomass of wild animals, but we've annihilated most of those animals and decimated their populations or caused them to be extinct. And we've increased our own population and that of livestock to outweigh everything else. All right. Our population just in the past 50 years has doubled, and the wild animal population that has been tracked by the WWF and ZSL has been cut by about 70%. Okay. Now that's by 2017. Things are probably even much worse right now. Chickens outweigh all species of wild birds. Just one species that we've bred into existence exceeds all wild bird biomass by 3 times. And there's 15 to 20 species of wild birds there. And through breeding these animals, which is a form of genetic manipulation, we cause these chickens to grow very, very fast. Okay. So they're extremely efficient, but they're not good for the environment at the quantity that we consume. In terms of the animals that we slaughter on land, we slaughter about 70 to 80 billion animals per year. That's about 3,000 animals per second, mostly chickens. All right. And we occupy most of most of the land that we use on Earth. Okay. Uh, well, about 50% is used for agriculture, and let's say, about 40% is used, like between 35 to 40% is used for animal agriculture. Okay. So animal agriculture is our dominant form of land use on Earth, but it only provides less than 40% of our protein. Okay. And you can see again here how much greenhouse gas emissions comes from animal agriculture as compared to plant-based foods. You'll see like the plant-based foods are down here on the bottom. They create so much less greenhouse gas emissions, use so much less land, and use so much less water. When people are grazing animals, there's all this talk, this misinformation about grazing animals being ecological. That is the largest cause of deforestation, soil compaction, soil erosion, desertification, right? Because these animals, in many cases, will strip the land quite a bit, and you'll have these environmental impacts. And most of the land that we use for grazing used to be a forest or a wetland, so we had to deforest it before it could become a pasture. And even if it was a grassland, the grassland is very altered when we start grazing cattle on the grassland as compared to its natural state. And we will kill all the predators and other animals that are in the way of our grazing animals. And those are things that they will not tell you. Okay, there's worse methane emissions, and the animal waste contaminates water systems when we do grazing. I've reached almost 20 minutes here, so I'm going to just wrap up in a minute. Okay, in terms of fish, we're basically fishing about 1 trillion fish out of the ocean per year. Okay, and that's about 30,000 fish per second that we take out of the oceans, and we're wiping out fish. And farmed fish is not eco-friendly because you have to. What they usually do is they decimate the wild fish, grind them up, and feed them to the farmed fish. They also use soy, but then again, there's the feed conversion ratio issue. Okay, and we're increasing fish production by quite a lot. And then there's good evidence that biodiversity is significantly impacted by animal agriculture, especially, as well as other issues. Okay, we don't want to forget about the population and all the other materials and land fragmentation, and everything else that we do to destroy global ecosystems and biomes. Okay, so basically, we want to be able to feed 10 billion people with less of a footprint, and the more plant-based we go, the smaller the amount of land that we could use to feed the total population. And if you're using a smaller amount of land to create the same amount of food, that means you could feed more people with less land, and also you can rewild the land. So we can allow land to become a forest again, to become a wetland again, or to become a natural grassland. If we're grazing it, we can allow it to become a natural grassland, and we can rewild a lot of the land. So that would be a great thing for biodiversity. Again, I'll mention the Eat Lancet project, which talks about feeding 10 billion people, improving health, and at the same time decreasing footprint. And I'm going to just touch again on industry-funded media. There's all kinds of movies, as well as studies and influencers, and all kinds of people who are creating narratives that tell you that animal agriculture is beneficial for the environment. But they're just telling you the opposite of the truth. They can fabricate any kind of narrative and quote some poorly done studies and oftentimes misquote studies to try to, support their narrative. And I think they know that they're doing these things. Here's some of the techniques they use. They have a huge financial power. The animal agriculture industry is about $3 trillion worldwide. They spend billions in marketing. They have a lot of media. They influence the United Nations and IPCC and COP. They hire their own academics to create misinformation, and the list goes on in terms of the types of narratives they create to try to make animal agriculture sound benign or even beneficial for the environment. But in most cases, they're fudging a lot of stuff and telling the opposite of the truth. And I don't think we can get into all that. The last thing I just want to mention is pandemics. All these pandemics, and including the avian influenza and COVID-19, all these things come from animal agriculture. That also includes things like swine flu, HIV, Ebola, and other historical things like measles, which is coming back now. That comes from animal agriculture and has killed millions of people. So we are very, very, very high risk of future pandemics through animal agriculture. I'm going to wrap up there with a couple of resources. I have this presentation on pandemics and a resource there in plant-based data. And final thoughts are that plant-based diets are very good for health. We just need to know the science and distinguish misinformation from good information. Good for, very important for sustainability globally and food security and for pandemic risk reduction. There's some good movies, some good resources, and I'm going to hand it over to you guys back because I've exceeded my 20 minutes. I'm very sorry about that. I went 23 minutes.
Oh, thanks very much, Tushar. Not at all. Would you like to take a couple of questions because your schedule may prevent you from staying into the Q&A portion of the evening? Would you like
Sure. If there's a
couple?
couple of good questions, please, before I'll try to be brief so that I don't take away time from anyone else.
No questions in the chat window at the minute.
I have a
Anybody?
question. Debbie's got
Oh,
a question.
go ahead.
Debbie, do you want to go first?
Oh, I just really wanted to say thank you, Dr. Tushar, for making the time. I understand you had to flip around your schedule, which can be no easy task for an emergency room doctor. But speaking of doctors, how open are they to this kind of information from a disease prevention perspective? Thank you.
That's a good question. I think that there's a lot of variability. You're going to find people who are more open these days, and you're going to still find people who are closed off. We'll find that whole spectrum. And I think as time goes on, there is building awareness amongst physicians. There's all these conferences now, and in Ontario and across Canada, there are some plant-based medicine physicians who are doing lifestyle medicine, and as well as fantastic dietitians and others as well. So I think the landscape is changing, maybe not fast enough, but there's change. I
Thank
can
you.
meet James' question.
Jane, would you like to go next?
Hi, it's actually my husband Bram. Hi, I just came in during the end of that. So good stuff. Like I'm actually studying to be a dietitian, so nothing new that I did. But I'm just curious of how you view the topic of like the protein quality arguments, how amino acid balance and all that. I'm just what are your thoughts on that, animal versus plant protein, and how do you answer people's questions like when they do have it on that, if you ever get that?
I think Visanto can probably get into this even more, but the thing is, this is very exploited by the animal agriculture industry. There may be some minor differences, right, in terms of how fast you can absorb something and how much of you can absorb and how much it's going to affect your performance, but it's minor. And as long as we're eating a little bit of variety of foods, all plant foods have all the essentially amino acids. They just may have them in slightly different proportions than what our own body has, and and of course, animal foods are kind of very close to what our own body has, right? In most cases, so there may be that small advantage, but it's so minor. And as long as you're eating a good plant-based diet and getting enough protein, I think that a lot of people who are plant-based or vegan, they underemphasize. They kind of get a little bit dogmatic the other way, and they say, "Oh, you don't really need to really worry about protein at all." I think you need to track it a little bit or be aware a little bit because I know that outside of studies in real life, I know some people who just really underconsume, right? I see that in my own family. So they need to up it a little bit. But that is not hard. And you can easily get enough to be an athlete or do whatever you want to do. And to be a healthy elderly individual, you want to get a gram or 1 gram of protein per kilogram of sort of your healthy estimated body weight, maybe slightly more, okay? But that's not hard. It is hard if you don't know what you're doing, but there's a tiny bit of a learning curve, but it's not hard. Okay, so these guys are overblowing it. But the thing is that the protein quality, the real question of protein quality, is what does it do for your long-term health? And so they're talking about one type of protein quality, but the protein quality I want to talk about is how does it improve your overall health in terms of mortality, heart disease, cancers, diabetes, obesity, and dementia, and all those things. And that's where plant proteins are a clear winner. So in terms of protein quality, that's what we should really be talking about. And the bottom line is that you can get enough protein for all your needs, even if you're an athlete or something like that. You can do it.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I kind of say similar thought. Just curious if they're had any different views. Thanks.
And knowing that Vesanto has slides on protein, we'll kind of wait for Vesanto's presentation.
Okay.
Continue on that theme. Mary,
Yeah.
you turned on your video. Did you have a question?
No, I just was finished eating.
Oh, all right. This is a place to eat. Laura, did you want to finish with a question or are you okay?
I just have a quick one. Well, maybe it's not so quick. With all of the research done, sort of proof that overall a plant-based diet is better for you, and with Canada not being a profit-driven medical society, maybe less so than the States, which maybe you could consider profit-driven, why is plant-based diets not more promoted among the medical profession?
I think it comes back to the earlier question. It's just that most societies have have had some amount of animal foods in their society for quite a long time, and for various reasons, Visanto even has studied this more than me. The idea of animal protein has become very dominant over a certain amount of time. And that has become very culturally ingrained, and I think in a lot of people. So I think there's a lot of sort of bias around those things. Plus, uh, there are certain conservative points of view or other points of view, there's just that are very ingrained in that. And I think people also really like their animal-based foods, right? They like to eat those things, and so they're biased towards them from that cultural way. They grew up with these things, many, many different things that are at play here. So it's a combination of all these things, and there's a learning curve in terms of um, understanding the science, in terms of getting over the psychological barriers, in terms of learning the recipes, in terms of having other things that people enjoy to eat and learn to enjoy those things as well as having some substitutes that taste good, but hopefully they are also within parameters, good, healthy parameters, like plant-based meats that are within healthy parameters rather than the ones that are less healthy, right? And so there's a lot of work to be done, and right now the meat industry is also very very involved in lobbying, like the United Nations. Countries, they lobby environmental organizations as well to their narratives, and they're creating a lot of these narratives that are causing extreme amounts of confusion in terms of trying to say that seed oils are bad or plant proteins are of really low quality, or other narratives that they keep creating and marketing, and they dominate the marketing world because they have so much money to spend on all these things, right? So it's a very uphill journey against this massive corporate influence as well.
And as Charlyn's noted in the chat window, she'll be speaking a little bit on this topic in a few minutes. Well, Tushar, thanks again for your presentation. Please stay with us as long as you can, but understandably, you've got a night shift coming up. So if you need to sneak out, hearts are appearing, and I'm sure on behalf of everyone here, thanks again for being part of tonight's session.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say that like I'm a big proponent that I hope that the Green Party and other political parties too catch on to this. So if there's things that we can do to, start with you guys, but go to other parts of Canada with the Green Party and get more and more people on board and maybe have some focused sessions to talk about the science because I think people are going to have questions that they're going to have heard the things from animal agriculture about from the environmental point of view as well as the nutrition point of view that we need to maybe go into a little bit more focus to debunk those things so that they can because people who are easily believing the stuff they'll just believe me but for people but really we should go through the science and just make sure that hey, what are they saying, how do they justify it, what are we saying, and what's the evidence behind it as well so that can be confident that they're believing in the right things, not just blindly believing even what I'm saying.
And thanks again for your support of the Green Parties. We have two guests today in the audience, Mary from Maryland and Marcy from Pennsylvania, who are with their Green Parties stateside. So today's session is being brought to you tariff-free by the Green Party of Manitoba, but enjoyed by Green parties around the continent. On that note, let's move to our second presenter, and that's my dear friend Vesanto Melina, who's a registered dietitian and lead author of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics last position paper on vegetarian diets. She received the Dietitians of Canada's Riley Jeffs Award, the organization's highest recognition. Vesanto is a co-author of several internationally acclaimed books, including several on my bookshelf behind me, but notably a recent book called Plant-Powered Protein. With that, Vesanto, would you like to put up your slides or would you prefer me to put them up?
Okay, well, just put me on for a second.
All right.
So,
Sorry, did you want to share your screen?
oh,
I'll,
no, for me. Can you do that?
I'll put
You
your
have
slides up.
Tushar on.
Yep, momentarily.
Okay. Okay. Now, it's
Okay.
I thought you were going to put me on. Oh well.
Oh, uh, would you like me to advance the slides for you, or would you prefer to do that on
No,
your?
I was going to do it, but I thought you could put the picture of me, which says Camdore on it.
Oh, I think just go ahead and everybody can kind of see your PowerPoint on the side. So just share screen. Are you able to
So,
share your
can
screen?
I share my screen? You can let
Yep,
me?
yep.
Okay, I'll see. Share screen. But
This moment is being brought to you by Zoom, your friendly virtual meeting software.
it looks like um, looks like you're sharing your screen. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. And now can I share my screen?
Yeah, my apologies. I had it still
Oh,
showing.
that's okay. Okay, there we go. Yeah, we're back in business. Okay. You see it?
Not yet.
Not yet?
There we go.
Okay. So anyway, Tushar, first of all, I want to thank you. Your slides were great, and I really enjoyed them. I'll look forward to seeing them in more detail. And also, it's so wonderful having a doctor that can speak so well about nutrition. And we have more of that here. I think St. Paul's Hospital, someone told me this week, has gone to plant foods as the first choice for its, yeah, I see somebody falling off her chair there. Yeah, in Maryland. Yeah, it's happening. And I'll show you some of the books later, like our Kick Diabetes cookbook. I was on a book tour in Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey. And this is being used by hospitals in New York, which have the first two choices are plant-based on menus in 7 hospitals. And the third menu could be chicken or fish. So the progress is happening. And our plant-powered protein book is #1, when it came to #1 on Amazon for sustainability. So does give some encouragement. Well, there's a lot of unencouraging things happening in the world. There are some encouraging ones as well. And we have a Green Party sign on our lawn. I went and hammered it in a few days ago. And, so I think one of the things, this is just a little political thing, but I would like proportional representation. And the big disappointment for me was that Trudeau didn't put that in, even though he said he would. So I hope everybody will write. And you'll see my email address, and I have the email addresses of every member of parliament in Canada. And I would be happy to give that on a Excel sheet so you can send it out to everybody with one click, saying this is the most, Mr. Carney or whoever, this is the most important thing is to have that happen. Because we want things like the Green Party to be more represented than it is, even if it doesn't get to #1 right away. So now I'll go back to nutrition, which we're going to be looking at here. So here's a picture of food. And what do you think is protein deficient here? Any thoughts? Well, none of it. Yeah. So we know that every animal gets its essential amino acids from plant foods, either directly or down the line. Like there isn't any plant that doesn't have all of the essential amino acids. The only food that is short of an amino acid is gelatin, which is made from animal bones. So it's an animal product. That's the one that's short of an amino acid. So some of the studies, and I'll tell you, I'm an old codger. I just turned 83 on a week ago. And so I've seen a lot of nutrition over the years, lots, and seen changes and in our concepts about, amino acids. And, we thought that vegetarian back in the 60s and 70s, and that was like for hippies that wore sandals and didn't shave their legs and stuff. And, that was kind of the attitudes. But now we're seeing it in such a positive light, and a lot of people are going, yeah, I know it's healthier, and thinking they could inch their way there, which is really progress for a lot of people. And some of us have just leapt on board. For a long time. I've been vegan for about 32 years now. And so anyway, the thing that I've been working on is to help people have it healthy and delicious. So you got to have it taste good too. So anyway, these are some pictures of the foods from our books. Our books are about nutrition, but they have really good recipes too. We have these recipe testers in Canada and the US that won't let anything into our books without it being 5-star. So anyway, these are just some little things. So with Canada's diet and health, we aren't quite as high as the US on the ultra processed foods, but we're still pretty bad. And the fat on our bodies comes from the meat, the dairy, the cheese, the fats and oils, the fast foods, and then sometimes from the high amount of sugars that we eat, which get turned into body fat. So we have 36% of us as adults that are overweight, and 27 in addition that are obese and have the elevated health risks. And a third of Canadian children, surprisingly, are overweight. And, some of them eat vegetables, but it's the ones shown here. And they get ketchup as their tomato sauce. And then 5 in 10 Canadian adults don't eat enough vegetables and fruits. And so when we've got our subsidized medical system, that is covered for people, better nutrition could save us a lot of money. Some of this data was from York University in Toronto. So some of the big studies, of course, there have been a lot of these now, came from the Adventists, the Seventh-day Adventists, and they were a really helpful population because they they would be part of that community for a long time, and they would fill in their questionnaires, and people knew when they became ill or passed away, or anyway, they were a population that you could really do long-term studies on. They even had one before this. So they ended up having 96,000 health conscious participants over decades. And that would fill in their questionnaire, say what kind of diet they were on, and whether they had developed a chronic disease. I've just got a tickle in my throat, so don't worry about it. So they ended up being all health conscious because typically they don't drink, they don't smoke, they get some exercise, and the variation on them was whether they would include some meat, and even then they didn't eat a lot of meat, or whether they would have some fish once in a while, whether they were lacto-ovo vegetarian, and a significant amount were vegan. The person who started the Adventists had really had long-term vision that eventually their religion would be more plant-based. So what they found for the vegans, so remember, these are being compared with health-conscious meat eaters, that they had way less hypertension. Their blood pressure problems were minimal. Of course, even on a vegan diet, I mean, you could be having pop and chips, they weren't typically that much, but there's a range even within the vegan dietary pattern. Heart disease, 55% less. Type 2 diabetes, there's kind of a range in different parts of the study, but you can see they got like half as much or a third as much type 2 diabetes. The cancers, again, a bit of a range for which cancers it was, but breast cancer, significantly less. The male cancers, gastrointestinal cancers, lung cancer, and we also find that for kidney problems, significantly less. And so these were, interestingly, they found that the vegans were the only group, so this is across North America, the only group that were, on average, had body mass index within the healthy range. So they had a healthy body size. This is another study from Japan, and the studies that come out are really quite fascinating that they do in different parts of the world. So this one followed a population group, and they were followed for 17 to 21 years. They were adults, 45 to 74 years old, and there were over 70,000 of them. And they looked at whether they had the differences in their calories, whether they had 3% calories from meats or whether it was from plant protein foods, like if they made this switch. And that was surprisingly, the amount is like a quarter of a hamburger or one slice of bacon was replaced with a quarter cup of beans. And what they found is that the reduction in total mortality was 34% less when you had the beans and with instead of the red meat, and 46% less if you had beans, peas, lentils, tofu, that kind of thing, instead of processed meat. And what they mean by processed meat is ham, bacon, sausage, pepperoni, salami, that kind of thing. So processed meat really is quite harmful. And they found that the reduction in cancer mortality when you chose one over the other was 42% if you replaced red meat with things like beans, tofu, and 50% less if you replace processed meat. So why is there this plant-based advantage that Tushar mentioned, and also in these studies, which is just coming out time and time again? Well, the plant foods minimize the pathogenic dietary components, and you won't see these, listed on packages of meat, but they have things like new 5G, which is linked to cancer. We're trying to figure out, why is cancer linked to red meat so strongly? And why is it linked to sausages and ham and this kind of thing even more strongly? And there's a component called new 5G that's in both. We used to think that it was about saturated fat and the presence of that. So we're still trying to figure out why with cancer, with heart disease, it's pretty clear there are a lot of problems, TMAO, new 5G, but nutrition is a very lively science, so we keep finding things out and finding things out. So it turns out there's a number of pathogenic dietary components in the animal products, and they're not in the plant foods. And the plant foods have all these protective dietary components. The vitamin C, the vitamin A, carotenoids, and the protective phytochemicals, the antioxidants. So there's a lot of advantage when you shift towards more plant foods. Even small steps like replacing 3% of your calories can make a big difference. Now, people around the world have noticed this. The Eat Lancet reports, the first one was done by, I think, 57 different right authors, and the latest one had 300 authors. So we're recognizing this around the world. And this is kind of a fun slide, that the flags are over at the left here. But Brazil, they say eat foods mainly of plant origin. Canada, mostly plant-based foods. China, cut meat consumption. Denmark, eat plant-rich. Estonia, plant-based. Germany, plant-based. Netherlands, less meat, more plant-based. Qatar, emphasize plant-based. Taiwan, plant-based. UK, eat more plant-based. Do you notice one country that's not listed? It's funny, but it hasn't come out on the guidance yet from the US. Now, with our food guides, we have learned over decades the health importance of plant-based eating. Although I really appreciate, by the way, in the US, Dr. Neil Bernard's efforts, and the steps that he's making are quite powerful and important. So our Canadian food guide, if you look at it in 1982 to 92, here's exactly how it was. The top half is all animal products, and milk and milk products were required for everybody. And we've realized since that about 70% of the world's population has some degree of lactase insufficiency or lactose intolerance. And, they get gastric problems if they drink a lot of milk, even more than about a third of a cup. And we had it on the food guide that everybody's got to have this. We had it right there on the food guide. And the other big group that's featured, so the top half of the food guide is the dairy and the meat. And they've got a few little beans sprinkled in there as alternates, but they're certainly not featured very strongly. And then the fruits and vegetables are a quarter of the slide. Now, if we go to our present food guide, we see that half the plate, and when we look at this as a plate, it's not supposed to be every meal, but this is like your day's intake. We find that half of it is vegetables and fruits, a really colorful mix, as Tushar said. And then the protein foods are a group, and they include some animal products and they include a lot of legumes, the different beans, lentils, tofu. And then grains are the one that you can kind of shrink down if you want to cut calories, but they're definitely whole grains. And then water is your drink of choice, not milk products.
Santa,
So
can we give you
people
5 more minutes?
still wonder, as somebody did here, where will I get my protein though if I eat more plant-based? Well, it's a question. So this little rodent at the side or squirrel, weasel, is asking one of these very large, well-muscled animals where they get their protein. And we know that there's so many large animals that are herbivorous. So, we've got baboons and giraffes and elephants and mooses and cows and just so many animals that are well muscled. And we know that humans as well. And when we look at sources, I lived on a cattle ranch for a while, and those cattle would graze. There were 3,000 head of cattle. It was in British Columbia. And I I was just renting a house and they were all outside, but they would be um, grazing for part of their life, and then they were trucked to Calgary, and then they were slaughtered there, and then put in little packages, and then trucked back again. So I could see the environmental impacts was so extensive. Like they were given a lot of, even when they grazed, they were given a lot of food to fatten them up for the slaughter section.
Vesanto, we'll give you a 4 minute warning, okay?
Okay.
There's the
Um,
bell.
yeah. So now, if you look at these, do you think they should be protein foods or fat foods? If we see, these are what we think of traditionally as protein foods. You've got cheddar cheese, eggs, beef. People really think of these as protein foods. But if you look at the calories from fat, those are really significant. And you can see why, with the amounts that are consumed in North America, we have so many overweight and obese people. And it's a lot saturated fat. So if we need at least 10% of our calories from protein, remember the last slide was like 20 to 30 to 40% calories from protein. So which food groups do you think can deliver that much of these different plant foods? Well, it turns out that grains actually provide about 41% of the world's protein, and seeds and nuts, and especially like Manitoba Harvest hemp seeds, are really high in protein, close to the 27%, close to 30%. The different vegetables can provide protein, and especially the greens are quite high there. Even though they're low in calories, they deliver a lot of protein per calorie. The ones that don't have protein are the fruits, but they deliver a lot of other protective substances. And the real heavy hitters are the legumes, the beans, the soy. These are really the protein superstars. So this is our plant-powered protein book. And Brenda Davis, who is very fit at 66, I can still do a 2 minute plank. And there's Corey, Brenda's son, who's 37. And he's a government agrologist. And that's why environmentalist, is that was what an agrologist does in part, works with different groups about the land. And he helped us with the sustainability part of this book because there's such powerful research now about environmental choices and dietary choices. So if we look at food through the day, people just don't know always what they can be eating at different times of the day. But I know, like, my husband will have peanut butter on toast a lot of times, or some people have beans on toast, masala dosas. I first learned to be vegetarian when I went to India, and they have wonderful use of legumes, soy milk, soy yogurt, a tofu. So there are many, many different choices, even at breakfast. And it's good to be including some kind of legumes like soy milk or soy yogurt or something at breakfast even. And lunch and supper, we have just beautiful choices. And so it's good for people. It's kind of a relief when we go, oh, I found something I like. You have to start going to different aisles in the supermarket. And even for desserts, there can be chia pudding that has the omega-3s, the black bean brownies. These are from our Kick Diabetes cookbook. Bliss balls, I learned from a young Afghani woman. Um, and double chocolate surprise cookies. Those cookies have black beans in them and the other cookies have seeds in them. So legumes, this is my about third last slide. So they promote a very healthy gut microbiota. They really, really do keep the intestinal organisms protect us a lot. They're like a little team in there that's keeping us healthy and keeping down the bad microbiota. And legumes are important for that. They support our digestive health and thus reduce our risk of GI problems. They lower our LDL and total cholesterol, reducing risk of heart disease and stroke. They stabilize our blood sugar and reduce risk of type 2 diabetes. And I'm from a family that had a lot of alcoholism in it. And I found it very important for legumes to help me keep my blood sugar stable. Like I have to have beanie stuff at lunch or at supper, to keep my blood sugar stabilized. They improve satiety, so they help with weight loss and have iron, zinc, other nutrients like tofu set with calcium, black beans and white beans, calcium. This is the second last. Eating Canadian. So one of the things I think a lot of us are adjusting our habits so that we eat things that are grown within this country. And we're the biggest exporter of lentils in the world. I don't know how that'll adjust with the tariffs, but I hope a lot of us keep eating more lentils or increase that. And we're a global leader in wheat, pulses, which is the British word for legumes, beans, peas, lentils, and in soy production. And we've got many other crops like the hemp seeds, the pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds. So we do have a wonderful production of different um, produce, and we can be supporting our Canadian economy extremely well when we eat the things that are grown locally. And there was a little bit of a mention about fats, but the really good fats to choose are whole food fats. So here we've got an avocado, but there can also be the seeds, the omega-3s, the pumpkin seeds. And the one thing that came up when Tushar talked was about fish or the long chain omega-3s. But fish get their long chain omega-3s from microalgae. They don't even make it. So we can go directly to the source and get plant-based microalgae, DHA and EPA. And Brenda Davis and I have been exploring that a lot ourselves, having testing to see what levels we're at. And we actually found it was helpful to take some microalgae supplements, like 500 to 1,000 milligrams. I think it's milligrams. Anyway, this is the last slide, and I put a thank you and also my email address and some of our websites. So, and I think I told you my name up here is my husband's name. Like we share our Zoom, so that's why that shows up there. So that's the end of mine.
Thank you very much, Vasanto. That was most informative. And always, I learn something when I attend one of your lectures. Rather than take questions right now, because we're running just a little bit behind, we'll go to Charlyn's presentation. And let me introduce Charlyn before we pass the mic over and I get Charlyn's slides up. Uh, Dr. Charlyn Black is a professor at the University of British Columbia School of Population and Public Health. She's a nationally recognized health systems and policy researcher and was formerly a founding member and co-director of the Manitoba Center for Health Policy, where I first met Charlyn many years ago. Um, so on that note, Charlyn, would you like to start? And I'll get your slides up, lickety split.
You're muted, Charlyn.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking Tushar and Vesanto for providing such compelling evidence about why plant-based diets are so important. And Dennis, if you can go back one slide, that would be great. And so what I thought I would do is, understanding that they would set this up, I have a background in really public health and policy. And so my interest is really how do we create change given the strength of the evidence for both for plant-based diets to both make us healthier and to make our planet healthier. Dennis, are you able to do that or?
Just getting the share working.
So anyway, I've titled there you go. Okay. All right. My talk, Can We Make Healthy Choices Easier? A lot of us have heard the evidence that we should adopt more plants in our diet, but how do we do it? So I want to, as Tushar did, recognize that I am coming from actually unceded land of the Coast Salish and Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations in Vancouver here, and acknowledge my responsibility for furthering action on reconciliation. So, Dennis, if you can go to the next slide. And in public health, we have considered how do you really make change and what are the levels you really need to consider in order to make sustainable change. And this health impact pyramid from Frieden has played a big part in our discussions within the public health community. We recognize that you'll see at the top of this pyramid is, education and counseling, telling people what to do. And it may increase individuals' uptake, but certain individuals are more able to make changes like we're talking about than others. And there's increasing individual effort needed the higher you are on this pyramid. So if we go down the pyramid, we see that can we create environments where it's easier to make healthier choices? And what are the options for doing that? And as we move down the pyramid, we actually can have an increasing impact on both health and planetary change at the population level. So the next slide will show some of the ways you can think about this. Now, this is more general than food. This is this health impact triangle again. And in public health, we've had debates about, do we do health promotion? We promote health. We tell people what to do. And that focuses on empowering individuals and communities to improve their health. But this contrasts with an approach to change the context, right? The systems within which we live and work and play, which utilize legislation and other measures to address health issues at a much broader level. And so I'm going to really move through this pyramid and talk about some of the approaches we have taken and that we can take, because I'm going to argue there are really many changes we can make to enhance the adoption of plant-based diets. Next slide, please. So Vesanto talked about the Canada's Food Guide, and Dennis?
Sorry, Charlyn. There we go.
Okay. I think what we've heard is that the food guide is educational, but relies on dietitians, other people to take it up, individuals to learn to change to make changes that may be very difficult to make. And I think Tushar spoke to some of those, even though Vesanto has all sorts of ideas for how to do it. Next slide, please. The next level on that food impact pyramid was, the clinical level. Can we encourage the clinical doctors, the healthcare system to make a difference here? And there is now recognition of plant-based diets within a certification, a residency program within. It's in the US, but many Canadian doctors are certified. I believe, Tushar, you are, or you may. Anyway, we're both members of the ACLM. This really is a response to the epidemic of chronic disease we're having, that more and more doctors are becoming trained in lifestyle medicine. Next slide, please. And so there are 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. I'm not going to go through all of them, but central and first and most important on the list is nutrition, with recommendations for a plant-based, a whole food, plant predominant diet to prevent, treat, and reverse chronic illness. And I'll just say there's more and more evidence not only that we can prevent these chronic illnesses that really are the epidemics in our society right now, cardiac disease, diabetes, obesity, but that we can actually reverse some of these chronic diseases. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Zoom's a little bit irritated here. There we go.
Okay. Now, this is a cartoon. The first day of medical school is really not like this, but recognizing that over the past half century, we've shifted from a burden of infectious disease, which, for the most part can be cured, to an epidemic of chronic disease. And chronic disease is very, very expensive for the medical care system. It requires ongoing management, often from multiple specialist doctors, with accompanying expectations for ongoing investigations, pharmaceuticals, ongoing treatment. And within, I would argue, a payment system that favors doing more. Even though the Canadian medical system is a publicly funded system, the way doctors get paid is on a fee-for-service basis. And there are often incentives with heavy lobbying from the pharmaceutical industry to do more, always do more. And doing less is seen as substandard medical care. So doctors are working in an environment where and I'm no longer in practice, but where we're often encouraged not to miss anything and to do more. And can I have the next slide? Hopefully it will work. So, and in the other thing that happens, and why I think there are challenges to moving lifestyle medicine forward, is that big pharma really pushes, can we just use a pill to help people? So for the obesity epidemic, for diabetes, GLP-1 drugs you've probably heard about are coming aboard, and they are marketed. And guess what? The public would really rather take a pill than just change their diet or try and change their lifestyle. So big pressures here from big pharma and the whole medical industrial complex to keep this system as expensive as possible. Next slide. So let's skip this, but I'm just refreshing that now we're going to focus on where I think there's real opportunity here, and that's changing the context. And so I think to really make a difference in adoption of plant-based diets, we really need to think about what are the influences that make a difference in our food choices. And at the individual level, there are obviously social and the cultural norms within which we live, agricultural, industry, marketing, government, and then global kinds of issues, global food availability, dietary research. Okay, I'm going to try and move through my slides really quickly because I have limited time. Can I have the next slide? Here's another graphic of the factors that influence an individual's eating behavior. And these include, you'll see that individual factors are at bottom left, but our physical environment, the macroeconomic framework, and our social environments all make a huge difference. Um, and if I can have the next slide. Another huge impact is the whole range of what constitutes our food system and what are the many, many aspects that go into producing the food and the diets that we have understood as the important diets for us. And here you can see that there are food supply chains, food environments, food availability, affordability, prices are high, product properties, and individual factors, also consumer behavior. But all of these things across the top also influence the food systems that we create. And I'll go to the next slide. But I want us to think about the food environments that we live in. And you remember that picture of the Canada Food Guide. Vesanto showed us that half our intake during a day should be fruits, vegetables, and half our plate. But she also said that 60% of our calories come from ultra processed foods. So guess what? Guess how our grocery stores are laid out. What proportion of your grocery store is half of it devoted to fruits and vegetables, the things we should be putting on our plates? No, they're really built to encourage us to eat processed food. Some of it can be healthier, as Tushar said, but the layout of our food stores, and if I can have the next slide, grocery stores layouts, they utilize a system with fresh foods on the perimeter, and they strategically place impulse buys and high demand items and often junk food at eye level or near the end of aisles and at checkout counters to maximize visibility and sales. And research shows that store layout really influences our food choices and assumptions about what are normal dietary patterns. Next slide. And so, in addition to our food environments, the food we see every day, the food we assume is normal, there are policies that influence our food choices. One is food security. Do we have approaches to ensure that safe, nutritious food is available and easily accessible to all members of the population, which allows them to get the food they need without losing their dignity? Or, going to food banks isn't the best solution here. Support for school lunch programs, subsidies for agriculture. I found an article by Vesanto that suggested that our annual subsidies to Canadian farmers have ranged from 6.9 to more than $8 billion. And the primary beneficiaries from our tax dollars are beef, pork, poultry, egg, and dairy producers. Just the foods that are making us unhealthy. Nutrition labeling, influence of the mass media. I mean, there are tons of things that we can develop policies for to influence. And if I can have the next slide. So from a public health perspective, we can do lots to support healthier food environments. We can try and intervene to eliminate food swamps or food deserts, to reduce the amount of or make food labeling better, to work on procurement policies, to tax foods that are unhealthy, community and school gardens, zoning and bylaws. There are so many things. And these are just examples. I mean, a comprehensive list is beyond the possibilities of a short presentation like this. Next slide. But countering this, as Tushar mentioned, is the influence of big food. And, it's well known within the food policy environment that the lobbyists for the food companies have learned from what the tobacco companies did uh, to really try and argue against um, um, research that tobacco was harmful. Okay, next slide. And I'll try and, okay. So what I think is really interesting is the Danish government has developed a national action plan to support a transition toward a more plant-based food system. They introduced this in 2023. And this is the most comprehensive approach that any country has taken. Vesanto talked about different countries promoting plant foods, but this is a very, I think, comprehensive approach. They have worked with agriculture. So while the Canada's food guide was developed by Health Canada, Canada's food policy is developed by Agriculture Canada, that same group that argues for subsidies to beef, poultry, eggs, etc. So there is not alignment. Whereas in Denmark, they were able to get guidelines that brought these pieces together and got in fact, the action plan was developed by Danish agriculture, and all parties in the legislature agreed on it. So they've done a number of things to bring things together. But what I think is really, really interesting, especially from a Green Party perspective, is that they've conceptually linked the need to transition to a plant-based food approach to the clean energy transition that is already underway. Next slide. And maybe I'll skip this, but the European Union, I think, has also developed a very comprehensive approach to this and is pushing forward and is really trying to divest from a reliance on cheap American food. So my final slide, our food choices and our health. Can we make healthy food choices easier? And I'll say yes, if we address the challenge from a systems perspective that draws on multiple levels to effect change. Okay, done. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Charlyn. That was equally, if not more, interesting and informative. Um, we've got a few minutes left, and I think we've got a couple of questions in the chat window. If not, maybe hands up if you've got questions for Vesanto or Charlyn priority, or Tushar, who seems to still be on our call. Terrific, Tushar. Questions for Charlyn or Vesanto?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, what can we do when the egg industries and the food industries all have these billions of dollars to spend to keep their products on the front of the shelves? How can we possibly counteract that and somehow beat them?
Well, that's where I think we can. Okay, thanks, Tushar. Goodbye. Thank you for staying. That's where I think the Danish example is so powerful. And I just, have started scratching the surface on understanding this, but I think it really warrants an understanding of how did they pull the energy together. And if I look at my previous slides, I mean, some of the things they've done is they've provided incentives to advance research into diverse organic crops, develop climate-friendly foods, developed initiatives to increase the exports of Danish-made plant-based foods. So bringing an economic lens to it about how can we make Denmark the leader in an emerging approach, very much like, how do you move an energy agenda forward? So, and they've really also invested in a plant-based food grant to promote demand for plant-based foods, which I think is really interesting. So they've invested in research and education, and apparently 47% of Danes are interested in increasing their intake of plant-based foods. So they're doing something right. So could we develop systems that would look more comprehensively at this and, bring the information forward, bring forward the economic benefits and the sustainability benefits, tie it to the climate change agenda more prominently, etc. So I think there are many, many things we can do from a policy perspective.
Okay. Can I say something?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
okay. I just forwarded this list of email addresses for members of parliament. But in Canada, we give money. It's not called subsidies.
Right.
70% to dairy. Now that is for milk, which is linked to prostate cancer and it gets squeezed down to make cheese. And it's also hamburgers because the dairy cows, when they're 6 years old, instead of getting to 18, they get made into hamburgers. And that's linked to cancer. So we are subsidizing 70% of the money that goes to agriculture goes to dairy in our country. In the US, it's mainly towards meat. And the second on the list for Canada is poultry. But it's still going in the wrong direction. So what I did was send these email addresses. Dennis can send them out if you like. But I think we should be just barraging the members of parliament with this kind of thing. And if you've got all these email addresses of everybody in Canada, they always write back and say, are you in my riding? But it doesn't matter because they get the message that we should not be doing this, what's it called? Supply management, all this
Supply
money,
management.
supply management. They don't even call it subsidies.
Right.
To dairy, it should be going to healthy foods, food that will keep us healthy. And
Yeah.
at least they'll start getting the idea.
Yeah, but I think that, in making these points, there are things we can encourage policymakers to do can we encourage the production of our own food to make us more sustainable and that we can, so greenhouses, can we develop energy efficient greenhouses to make it possible to grow better plant-based foods in climates that may not be optimal for that? Can we think positively in addition to saying cut subsidies to meat? What
Well,
are the
then they should be
positive things?
shifted. Yeah, they should be shifted.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, all that money that's going to cows should be going to organic foods and produce.
yeah. So I think the Danish study is worth a little more investigation, and I think some comparisons of how far do policies and policy initiatives go in the various countries that are recommending plant-based diets, but where's the action to drive that message home and support it? So, thanks.
Good discussion. Any other questions for our remaining panelists? We're at the top of the hour, so if not, why don't we...
Debbie's got a question, I
Oh, I'm
think.
sorry, Debbie. Go ahead, please.
It was more of a comment, just sort of building on what has just been said. We do have a federal election upon us, so when those candidates come knocking on your door looking for your vote, that's the time to bring up this subject. And maybe it's a little bit of a silver lining what's going on with the US if we are in a position where we're trying to shake up our own food supply system, that now would be the ideal time to suggest transitioning to plant-based.
Yeah.
Yep, agreed. Well, on that note, I think let's thank our panel. Vesanto and Charlyn, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Waiting for little hearts and applause to show up in agreement that this was a fascinating and terrific session. Our next monthly series will be at the end of April, and we're looking at having some candidates who are running federally for the Green Party join us in a panel discussion on some of the platform that they're carrying into the election. So thanks again, everybody. We'll see you.
Thanks for what you're doing. Really appreciate the Green Party.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks for organizing, Dennis. Another job well done.
Yes, thank you, Dennis. Really good.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Let's thank the panel.
The panelists.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Right.
Night.